I have here something really interesting. This is the original 1611 King James Bible, the Holy Bible 1611 edition, King James Version. Now, this is really interesting. A lot of people don't know about this, but if you go to the book of Hebrews and you go to chapter 11, which that's what this is right here, this is chapter 11. This is kind of known as what they call the Hall of Faith. So they talk about all the different people throughout history who had faith. And in almost everything it talks about is basically biblical history. It talks about Abel, how he had faith, and how Enoch had faith. And it goes on through all of these people throughout history who had faith. Noah and Abraham and all these people. Sarah had faith. It talks about the faith of Moses, and the faith of the harlot Rahab, the faith of Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David. Now, there's this one thing that I think a lot of people probably find this to be confusing. Notice in verse 35, it says, women received their dead raised to life again. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's talking about Elijah and Elisha from 1st and 2nd Kings. They prayed that a boy would be raised from the dead. But that's not what I want to focus on. Right after that, this part right here, the second half of verse 35, it says, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, so they might obtain a better resurrection. For the longest time, I did not know what that was a reference to. Others were tortured, and apparently were given a chance to be delivered from that torture, but they did not accept deliverance. And why did they not accept deliverance? That they might obtain a better resurrection. For the longest time, I'm like, what is this referencing? What does this mean, a better resurrection? Better than who? Better than what? What is that a reference to? And so for the longest time, I really did not know what this was talking about. But in the original King James Bible, notice how it has this marginal note right here. So next to the word tortured, see that little asterisk next to the word tortured? That references in the margin the book of 2nd Maccabees chapter 7 verse 7. You see, a lot of people don't realize this, but when the King James Bible was originally printed back in 1611, which that's what this is basically a copy of the original King James. And a lot of people don't realize this, but the original King James Bible included not just the Old Testament from Genesis to Malachi, and not just the New Testament from Matthew to Revelation, but in between that, it had the books called Apocrypha. And in these books, they had the book of 2nd Maccabees. So the book of Hebrews is referencing 2nd Maccabees, which was in the original King James Bible. And when you go to the book of 2nd Maccabees, and you go to chapter 7, which it says right here, chapter 7, what you find is you find a story that actually matches up with what was written in Hebrews 11. And so it says, it came to pass also that 7 brothers with their mother were taken and compelled by the king against the law to taste swine's flesh, and were tormented with scourges and whips. Notice how it says they were tormented. And, it wasn't just the fact that it was swine's flesh, which obviously, pork is unclean. It was the fact that it was sacrificed to an idol. Even the New Testament says not to eat meat sacrificed to idols. And they said, we're ready to die rather than transgress the law of our fathers. And so he brought forth pans and cauldrons, and he heated them up, and he cut out the tongue of him that spake first, cut off parts of his body, went through terrible, terrible tortures. And, what's interesting about this is that he says, the Lord looketh upon us, and in truth hath comforted us, as Moses in his song. But he talks about the resurrection down here. And one of the other brothers was tortured. Notice how he says Thou, like a fury, takest out of this present life, but the King of the world shall raise us up. So notice how he says right here, but the King of the world shall raise us up, who have died for his laws unto everlasting life. So notice how they have a hope that the King of the world will raise us up unto everlasting life. So they have a hope in a resurrection. And notice how here it says, they're cutting off parts of his body, cut out his tongue and all this stuff. And he says, these I had from heaven, and for his laws I despise them, and from him I hope to receive them again. He's hoping in a better resurrection. Okay? And, there's a bunch of different brothers who talk about how there's 7 brothers total who talk about how they're not going to receive deliverance from this torture. And of course, his name is King Antiochus. He's the one torturing them. Okay, King Antiochus is the guy torturing him. He's a Greek king. And so anyway, this is the story that Second Maccabees, or this is the story that Hebrews is referencing. And even the King James translators made that clear. Because these guys, they were tortured. They were given a chance to be delivered. They refused deliverance. And they specifically said they had a hope in a better resurrection. And so when you go to the book of Hebrews, and you go to chapter 11, verse 35, when it says, others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Okay, there's 4 things here. Okay, so number 1, they were tortured. Number 2, they were given a chance to be delivered. They refused deliverance. And then they also hope for a better resurrection. And the King James translators, the 47 experts who translated the King James Bible, okay, what did they say here in their marginal note? And so the King James translators are telling you right here in their marginal note that this is a reference to 2 Maccabees chapter 7, verse 7. So, that's what it's a reference to. And it's clear as day for anyone who's, actually read it. But that's the problem. If you haven't read 2 Maccabees, and if you haven't seen this marginal note in the original King James, you're not going to know what that's a reference to. The people back in 1611 knew. The translators of King James, they knew what that was a reference to. But a lot of people today don't know what that's referencing.